ahead and start the recording. And now I'll try to mark down who's here. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. One, two, three, four. Okay, I think we got everybody marked here. So we'll go ahead and start on this and go through a few things this morning. First off, we're doing registration for summer semester has started this week. So that is now open. If you're a cybersecurity student, which most likely you are if you're in this class, you need to contact Mr. Spurlock or me for advice on which courses to take so that you can get your maximum benefits. Number two is so we are past halfway point now. We are on week 10, I believe. Yep. I am still some behind on grading a little bit from last week. There's, I think, one assignment I'm still got partly graded for your class, and I got to finish grading for the whole class. The discussion from last week I have not graded in your class, but I have in all the others. So I will get that finished, I hope, shortly. And then get busy on the discussion that was due yesterday. In one other class, what they turned in a week ago Monday, so a week before yesterday, I've got to grade that assignment. But in other classes, I believe I was basically caught up through yesterday. Items were all due last night in classes, so there's a whole pile of stuff. So I'm going to be working on that over the next few days and trying to get back completely caught up on everything, and also get transferring grades between Netacad and Blackboard going. If you have not turned in your permission slip, I need that as soon as possible. You can look in the grade book and determine if I have received your permission slip or not. There is a column at the beginning that is labeled permission slip. If it's got 100 in it, I have your permission slip. If it does not have 100 in it, I do not have your permission slip. Now, if you took 2451 from me in a previous semester or are taking it this semester, and you've turned in the permission slip you turned it in there when you took it, or you've turned it in this semester to there, I should have gotten it marked as far as if you're in it this semester. But if you took it a previous semester, I'm not sure who all took. So you will, if you did do that and you haven't turned in your permission slip yet, you need to write me and tell me you took 2451 from me. There is another instructor of it, which would not count, and that you gave me the permission slip back then. And then I can give you credit for the permission slip, and we'll have that taken care of. But if you haven't taken me for a Cisco course before, I need the permission slips, and there's a number of them still outstanding between my two Cisco classes. So please get those to me. I say registration has started. Spring Fling, I believe, is underway. Either last weekend, this week, or something. I think it's still going on. I don't remember schedule. I was off campus all of last week, and I've just barely glanced at email just a moment ago, but there could be emails in there that I didn't even see. So today, I do have your session and 2 more Collaborate sessions right after yours, one at 11:30 and one at 2. And then because we're doing IP addressing and subnetting in 2451 this week. Because of that, I'm doing them an extra session. So tomorrow I've got 2 Collaborate sessions, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, for them on subnetting, because I'm spending the first session that was yesterday morning and the one this afternoon just overall on IP, because the material in that chapter, which I think is like chapter 10, there's so much material stuff in it. Subnetting is well over a lecture by itself, and it's just part of that chapter, and then just the basics of IP version 4. So I chose to split it in 2 and do some extra sessions this week. Thursday, I'm speaking in North Carolina, Computer Instructors Conference. That's online. It was supposed to be in person, so I was supposed to be in North Carolina this week for a Cisco conference, and then to attend the Computer Instructors Association, which they've got me speaking 3 times on Thursday, where I'm going to speak about number systems and about subnetting. And notice I'm already talking about subnetting to my students earlier this week, so that works out perfectly. All right, so we are in chapters 17 and 18 now. Because I'm doing this from home, it's difficult for me to look at the screens quite as well as I can when I'm at the office with the dual screen setup there. So seeing when y'all type in messages, I may be a little slower on responding to them while I'm glancing at this, because I'm looking at the Cisco material as I'm going over it with you. But remember, all of you do have to post stuff in there in the chat box. And at this point in time, I only see one message, and it's a good morning. And y'all need to be posting some different things of questions and comments and stuff to get credit for not having to do discussion, because this is an engagement activity, and I have to show engagement in it to the school for y'all not to do the discussion. If you don't engage in it, then they go, it don't count as engagement, because there was no engagement. So make sure y'all do make some comments to me. All right. So are there any questions for me before we start going over the material? It could be on stuff from previous weeks. It could be whatever. Things coming up. It could be whatever y'all want to ask me about. So have y'all got any questions for me? Okay, let's look at the material then briefly. Chapter 17, they tell you they're talking about securing our foundations on our network and such in here, and that the chapter is going to be looking at some ways that attackers could attack what we do. So they're going to go through and look at a few different things on it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but just mention these to you today. So they talk about on some various IP services that could be attacked, and then they talk about some enterprise services that could be attacked. So within the IP services that could be attacked, they mentioned that ARP has a lot of vulnerabilities to it. And remember, ARP is used to convert IP addresses to MAC addresses. Similar to what we said about domain DNS, which actually is another attack in just a second, but where it converts domain names to IP addresses. In any event, ARP has vulnerabilities out there. In IP version 6, you're not going to be using ARP, you'll be using neighbor discovery. So with ARP, what can occur is that people can go in, and that's where they get into with ARP cache poisoning. People can go in and poison your ARP tables, which is your address resolution protocol tables, where you've got MAC addresses matched to IP addresses. Attackers can poison those. And by poisoning those, what I'm saying is that they will put in a wrong MAC address for an IP address. So when you go to look up an IP address to find its MAC address, instead of it going to a legitimate site, it points off to an illegitimate site and does on that. So there's ways for attackers to get into your ARP tables and to poison them and to put bad addresses in there that lead to their bad locations where they can then seize information from you. So that's the general idea of ARP poisoning. But the threat actor would get in there and set up their own little table pointing to something different, and that would cause the ARP request to go to the message to then, once the ARP request is returned, because it would return a message from the poison table instead of the real table. And because to attack it, all you got to do is, if you can get into the network, you can definitely attack it, because you can go directly to the table. Because remember, the ARP tables are just tables stored on the local machines there and on the actual switches. So if you can get into the switch, you can go in and change entries into the switch. So not having a secure switch protecting the settings in it, and not having your machine secured, can open up spots for the attacker to access the ARP table. All they got to be able to do is be able to get in there. Now, because they can go in several different ways on that, because they don't have to go in through ARP to do it. They just got to be able to get to the ARP table. So that's going to give them would give them access to it, and where they could then change on it. They could send requests across to appearing to be responses to other requests, and that the ARP table would see and go, oh, wait a minute, there's another ARP table knows something about this address, I'll add it to mine. Well, when it was defective. And Jermaine, the address on where to send the permission form to is sitting in module 1 in the assignments, where I've got the permission form sitting yet. Written up in the paragraph there of what was to be done in module 1 includes in there the address for sending the permission form to me at school. I'm at the Walker County campus, so you're going to send it to me at the Walker County campus. Jesse, are you asking about a lab? If so, what lab? But you can get into interactive mode, I know that, but I'm not sure what lab you're working on there. So DNS attacks is another one that you can attack the DNS tables. Again, you can poison the cache on them, that the threat actor would send record resources, or RR, they will show up in the table as RRs, to the DNS resolver for it to then stick that into the table and add it. So that would allow them to add those in there. You can also use, as part of that way to do that, that you can use do a DOS attack or a DDoS attack, which is a denial of service or denial or a distributed denial of service attack, to open to make attacks on there and increase the number of requests, and a huge number of requests going in to be there. The amplification and reflection one, that they can again use those attacks to hit those resolvers and to hide the source of where the messages are coming from. And then you can also just hit it hard with a lot of stuff negatively to it, to requiring it to have to be rebooted and restarted. They mention about stealth attacks, and they show you several of those. In a stealth attack, you're going in, they're sending information in, but making it appear as if it's something else, so it sort of just hides itself as it goes in. I don't know if y'all have read about stealth bombers and stuff. They're ones that radar doesn't detect, that they sort of hide themselves. Well, that's the same idea here. Fast flux are ones where they're changing things very quickly before it can be detected. And with the double IP flux one, they're going and changing the host name to IP address mappings and doing it where the whole table changes without, instead of just parts of it. And that hopefully, in their opinion, hopefully, that they are sort of hidden underneath on that one. So they can also go in and just monitor the network first to see how are the credentials spread around, and that's where they'll do their shadowing on it. DNS tunneling is where you can set up a tunnel through there. Quite often doing that, that what they're doing is that they're setting up the traffic to go somewhere else, and they have in turn encapsulated the packets, not to frames right off, but just encapsulated the packet and then encapsulated that packet so that the real information originally wanted is hidden in there with fake information all around it. So the idea is, let's surround it with some hiding it and encrypting it in different ways and sending it off where it doesn't stand out as much to them. DHCP is definitely one that can be easily done. Again, when you go to IP version 6, you're going to get away from DHCP because actually addresses are pretty well assigned everywhere in IP version 6. But with DHCP, it's assigning your addresses and other information to your individual machines. Well, the easiest way to rogue on this one is set up a fake DHCP server on the network. So when the client goes to request an address, it grabs it from the wrong server. Instead of grabbing it from the legitimate one, it grabs it from the other one. But you can end up with an address that points to the wrong gateway. If it points to the wrong gateway, it's sending out the wrong place out of the network. The DNS server is another item set there in DHCP. So if you send out illegitimate addresses, you're probably going to send out illegitimate DNS addresses also. And that way, when that client goes to look up an address, they're not going to look it up in the right place. They're not going to look it up on the good DNS server. Their DNS is going to point to a bad DNS server and then get them all bad information. They'll get rogue information. And then they take you through a lab on that to look at stuff on it. And then they talk about enterprise services, and there's a couple of things they mention fairly quickly right here. They talk about HTTP and HTTPS initially, and that those can be easily ways to be done on stuff. They remind you about errors and stuff, your numbers that HTTP gives you, that tells you about how your connection is. One of the things that they tell you to stop web-based attacks is make sure you keep your OS and browsers updated with their patches and updates. And then they strongly suggest using a firewall in the process to, or a web proxy to block these malicious sites also. HTTPS obviously is secure, but what all that's telling us is when the traffic's sent across, it is going across in an encrypted format. However, it could be going to a malicious site, because malicious sites will use HTTPS also, and nobody can steal their information as it goes off between the two machines. But HTTPS is a good indication to you to, if nothing else, to help you be more safe and reliable on it. They mention about my iframes, which has been a problem for years and years. I'm really surprised iframes are still used, because from the early 2000s there was a big push to not do anything with iframes, and some of the browsers refused to work with iframes. My web pages, as a general rule, do not use iframes. The only place they are using iframes is that I host at some different spots the domain names, and they will use iframes quite often to just put their information right there, and then they put the actual page inside iframe within it. I'm not real enthused on that, but that's the way they do it, and I don't have any control over it. But iframes allow you to put frames of information within a page, but somebody can get in and make changes to iframes real easily. You can go in and do view source and see things, and you can actually get in and make changes more than you ought to be. So be aware of that one. Email is definitely an issue continuously for attacking. That we see phishing attacks, we see people send out malicious attachments for ransomware, spyware, etc. on there, spam mail, how it gets, it can be spoofed. Hopefully all of you are well aware of looking at things to see what address does stuff really come from, as opposed to the address that shows on it. I get a fair amount of phishing, spam every day. So they do talk about those, talk about web exposed databases too, and that is a large amount of stuff out there. And that you're working with SQL doing it. They're going to have you do a lab, I believe, with MySQL in here. Client-side script, there's client-side scripting and host-side scripting. Client-side is where it's written on the client over the user, and that they're making queries to it, to the database. The host side is where it's written programs and stuff that are already existent usually, and that's on it. SQL injections is where people will get into the SQL databases where people can make queries, and instead of just making a straight query, sometimes on some databases, and it depends how well the database is built, that you can send a query that is much larger than the field can possibly be of what it's supposed to be. And when you send it, it will inject information into that table actually from there. And then there's extra information in there causing damage to the table. SQL injections have been around a long time and have been used a whole lot. So they mention about persistent versus non-persistent scripting, and to be careful with all of that scripting. And then they have you do go through and do an example on that one. That's chapter 18. Let me look back and see. Did Jesse give me any more information? All right. So he's saying on 1717. All that takes to impersonate a default gateway is just to be able to get into the individual client machines or to the DHCP or to change the DHCP server request to where you've got something that picks it up and that you send it the wrong information, that you send it a DNS, a default gateway that is not the correct address, that is to the malicious one instead. So it can, that's easily enough to get in there and make attach a machine or whatever. And you can do that in lots of places, that you can go hook up wireless and you're on their network now. Now, whether you're on their actual network that production's on or if they've separated it well out is another question. But you're on a network of theirs at that point. How much further you can get is the big question. And then you can set up your machine to be saying that you're sending out messages, set yourself up as a DHCP server or something else, or then break into the machines and change the DNS default gateway to change the default gateway to a different address and point it to a machine you want to point it to. All right, I'm going to have to be able to answer Jesse's question. I will have to pull down the lab. And let me look again what he said it was. Step 2C. All right, once you go into NS lookup, you should be able to easily spot to enter the interactive mode. Because if I go in NS lookup, and that's just a standard command that you can actually do at a Windows prompt. And you'll be in an interactive mode once you get in there. That you should be by default. That should be by default the interactive mode when you're at the greater than sign prompt. Because it's waiting for you to give it information on what it's going to do. Yeah, because when you get to the prompt right there, when you get to that command prompt that it's giving you the greater than sign, you are in interactive mode at that point. It has told you what server you're what's your default server that you're working off of and what its address is. And you're in interactive mode at that point. So they're just telling you that you will be in interactive mode. All right, let me look at 18 now for y'all. As soon as I can get back out of this. Out there. Okay. So let me come back down here. So now 18 they've got labeled as understanding defense, and that they're going to talk some about your defenses now and developing security policies. And I know some of y'all are working on that in Mr. Spurlock's class. And I heard a beep, so let me see if I can find what that's been there. Yes, Jesse, once you type in NS lookup and hit enter, you're sitting there in interactive mode. Because you'll be at a greater than sign prompt, and that tells you you're at interactive mode. All right. And for some reason, something else just decided to open up. So, first thing they do a little discussion on is they talk about security policies. I don't want to spend a lot of time right here on the policies. You're just getting an overview of these here in 18. So they talk about security policies, business policies, bring your own device policies, and compliance with the regulatory and standards. So, as part of defense in depth, first thing is you got to make sure you know what all of your assets are. So those are your devices, etc., and your data. Know what is it that you've got? What are the assets you're trying to protect? You need to know also what your vulnerabilities are. Where are your weaknesses that could be exposed by a threat actor? Is there a weakness that will allow that threat actor to connect in wireless and be in your network and in turn connect right to my machine, for instance, and connect to my machine, and that we don't have any passwords on our machines? Yes, we do at school. I do at home also. And that the threat actor just connects to my machine and is in my machine and can change all of those different tables, etc. on it. And remember, threat is any potential danger to an asset. So the threat is the danger to it. Did they get in? Could they get into that asset and do damage to it? Could they get in and wipe out everything we got on there? Or could they get into that device and proceed to encrypt all of the data we have on it? So first thing they do is tell you about going through, find all your assets. They talk briefly about identify your vulnerabilities. What are the things that could happen? What is a vulnerability of our system? So they go through and show you some e-banking ones that could happen. Is there an internal compromise? That could happen. That is actually quite common, and actually a large number of attacks actually are internal. The data center destruction, that's one I've always mentioned to people about, is if you keep it all on the cloud, is it sitting at one data center? What happens when the terrorist takes out that data center of AWS or whatever? And phony transactions, etc. So there's all kinds of things could be there. Then identifier threats. Go in and look at them all and identify those threats. Is it a threat coming from the internet? Is it a threat sometime hitting on the router? If they got a way that they can threaten our firewall, and so on through. And setting up all of those and realizing you can't be 100% secure. The only way you can be 100% secure is pull the plug and disconnect it from the internet. They talk about the security onion and security artichoke here in this chapter, and they're going to talk about those on some more throughout the book, the rest of the way. The security onion was the traditional way of looking at security, and that is looking at it as an onion. Which you think about an onion, you can peel back a layer, and then there's another layer, and then there's another layer, and there you got tons of layers in there, and that each of those layers wraps all the way around. And so the idea that was used for many years and still is used by a lot of people on the security onion approach is that you use a multiple layer approach, and that you're trying to block them out on several different layers of getting in there. So they're just layers like in an onion. And so that's the approach used on that, and that you've got different things set up on different layers as your ways to protect the data ultimately to that's at the middle of the onion. The artichoke approach is a newer approach. And it's a little bit different way on it. And what the idea of the artichoke is that with the onion, layers wrapped all the way around the onion. Now, I don't know how many of y'all have ever looked at artichokes, and by no means am I an artichoke expert, and I'm not an artichoke person that loves artichokes. I'm not one of them, okay? Artichokes are out there, they look nice, but I'm not real big on them as food. But what the idea of the artichoke is, instead of it being whole layers that went all the way around it, you have a whole bunch of leaves making it all up. And so now with the artichoke approach is you've got a lot of different leaves making up this whole security model and your whole model of all of your stuff, and you're not trying to protect everything every direction in just specific ones. You've got different parts that protect different parts of it. So if you pull back a leaf off that artichoke, now you see some more of the artichoke, but that didn't open up everything to you. Whereas when you took a layer off the onion, you just opened up the whole next layer. Now on the artichoke, you take off one leaf, maybe it's the password, so you manage to break through the passwords. Okay, well, that's nice and good, but that will help. You'll see something different in there, and where you've gotten to is not necessarily that you've gotten to the whole next, everything protecting on it. Everything is all interlocking, and you can keep peeling off leaves on it, and that opens up the different parts, but you're protecting the different parts differently. Because when you think about all of your assets in there and different parts, you don't need them all protected exactly the same. You need some different protections on them. And for instance, passwords. We can set up multiple different passwords within our system. So certain passwords protect certain things. And then we got other passwords that protect other parts. Well, if we peel off this password, okay, that got us a little further in, but that didn't get us in this part over here because those passwords are not associated or related to each other. So what was protected by password on this side of the model is not been affected by the fact that somebody has found an opening in your protection and passwords on this side of the model. It's taking it apart leaf by leaf. So it's sort of like getting into a building. The security onion approach says everybody has to go through the front door. And once they get through the front door, then they got to get by the security desk. The artichoke approach says we got multiple entrances around the building, and that each of those spots is differently secured. And if you get in one spot, that doesn't give you full access to the whole building because you're going to set off alarms all over the rest of the place. So that's the general idea of the artichoke versus the onion on the two security models. So the security artichoke and security onion. Now, I will tell you this also. Security onion has two meanings out there. We're talking about the model right here. That's the security onion model. There is also the security onion operating system approach that includes a lot of your security device programs and such that they call Security Onion 2. And actually, one of the two programs that you installed at the beginning of the semester and that you've used a few times of the virtual machines that they had you install, one of the two is the Security Onion program. And it includes in there a lot of other programs we've been using to be able to do ways to monitor and protect our systems. That's the Security Onion program, which works off of concepts of the Security Onion model, but it's different than Security Onion model. So keep in mind, Security Onion can be two different things, and actually is in this class. So then they talk a little about policies. You need to develop company-wide policies of how people, employees and the employers and everybody does things security-wise that impacts the whole organization. You'll have also policies that are specifically developed by HR and by your security people that identify information about your employees. And then you'll have your specific security policies that deal with, here's the specific policy on it. For instance, continuity policy is one that, and a lot of companies don't always think about. That is developing a policy that says, okay, if something disaster happens to our organization, how do we continue to keep on operating after that happens? When I worked at the Cloister at Sea Island, Georgia, and that's an island off the coast of Georgia down by Brunswick, and it's a 5-star, 5-diamond resort. And I was a computer operator there in the evening back in 1980, 80 or 81. And continuity was a definite important part to them. So one of the requirements on us as computer operators at night was we were told that if the island was evacuated for hurricane, whatever, and we were sitting right there on the ocean, beach was, my car was parked right by the beach, right by the hotel headquarters building that I worked in, that we were told that if evacuation order came in and we were told to evacuate the island, that we had to take all the backups with us. They had arranged to have other machines in some other spots available to them that they could then rent if that happened for us to start working again. And I was to keep those backups with me until I returned to the island or got with my boss somewhere. When I worked at Swainsboro Tech and ran their computer systems for 15 years, one of the things I had was if something had happened to the school building, I had backups of the material at my home. I also had contacted other schools. I didn't have formal agreements on it, but I had informal agreements on it that I could go to a couple of different schools and use their computer system to drop our backups into and proceed to then produce all the information we needed and keep on us operating from the computer side of our stuff. So that is a continuity thing. It's an important one. Know how you've secured your stuff also and know what you're doing on it. The security policy is, for instance, the identification and authentication. What do you require people to be able to allow them access into your buildings and into your computer systems? Password policies. Make sure that you've got minimum policies set up on those and how often they have to be changed, etc., and make sure they work. Also, don't change your passwords too often or people will write them down and you just defeat your own purpose. Acceptable use policy, that it will tell people about what they can do with the equipment, the organization, and what they cannot do with it. So what can they use for it And so, for instance, at school, there's actually an acceptable use policy that says I can actually look up some stuff on school computers and use them to look up some different things and such, but that I'm not allowed to go to pornographic sites, etc. Um, and then how do we handle security incidents, etc. Bring your own device policies, which is BYOD, is an extremely important one, and that you need to have plans about how you deal with that. Are you going to allow people to bring their own devices? If you don't, you got to make sure that they can't connect in with them, because they are going to bring their own devices anyway. Because, for instance, they're going to bring their phone and they're going to want to hook to your network. Well, if you don't allow them to hook to your network, that needs to be clear to them that they're not going to be able to hook into the network. You may allow them to and have a special subnet just for that purpose, and that you check on that. So they talk about different ways on that, turning on and off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and how and about what you're allowed to connect to. The other one, the last one that they talk about right here in the chapter, is make sure you know your regulatory and standards compliance. Depending on the organization you are, there are rules out there on how you have to protect certain things and how you have to secure certain things. For instance, the school has to keep your student records for 99 years. I don't know if you knew that or not, so that you can come make a transcript request in 99 years for get a copy of your transcript when you attended GNTC right now. Now, I sort of doubt any of you are probably going to be making that request in 99 years, but who knows? We may extend life by that point, and some of you may be around then and working and trying to find a new job and need your transcript from back here in 2022 to be able to get that new job that you want to get at that point. But you set things like that longer than what would be expected to make sure it keeps long enough. There's other requirements on things, on how things have to be protected. Social security numbers, a certain protection required on those, etc. So be aware of those. They are very lightly covering these, that they're just introducing the concepts to you. So that's chapter 17 and 18, and it's almost 11 o'clock. Let me flip back over here and see if there's any more questions. I gotta hide this message. Have you ever seen an instance where the backups were corrupted too after an attack? Yes, that occurs all the time. That is a major reason you want to make sure when you do your backups, as soon as you finish doing the backups, take them offline. You do not want them attached online at that point then, because if they're still attached, the attacker will attack them too. Early ransomware would only sit there and encrypt the C drive, or see if there was another major drive on the machine and just do those. Now the ransomware attacks, for instance, they look for every possible connection to that machine that looks like a drive and corrupt every one of them. So yes, they do get corrupted on it. Second thing is, you want to keep several copies of backups. You'll see mentioned about son, father, grandfather approach of backups. That's extremely helpful on that. So that if you did a backup today, that would be the son. The backup you did last week, you then move to saying it's the father, and the one the week before that's the grandfather, and then you might reuse the one from the week before that. But that way, if your stuff, the corruption had already been planted on your machine but hadn't been activated yet when you did the backup today, it would have gone on to the backup, which means that if you proceed to use that backup, you'll just end up right back where you were with the corrupted data, and that you would have to go back a backup or two on it to be able to properly retrieve the information. Even if you're backing it up to the cloud, you want to use the same approach. That answer your question, Joshua? But yes, backups get corrupted. Second thing is backups can be bad. That you can do a backup and then it could have a bad spot in it or whatever and make it unusable. So you do need to check your backups occasionally and make sure they actually do work by doing a brief restore on something to see and go in and look at them to make sure stuff is there. Because I have seen that also. Somebody had backups, but their backups, their media had been bad for 2 years, for instance, and they may have even gotten messages had been sent to them saying that it hadn't been able to do the backup, and they just ignored them. So you do want to watch that on the backups also. But people would keep the backups continuously connected. No, do not do that. Now, that's as opposed to redundancy. If you're doing redundancy also, and you need to do backups in addition to redundancy, if you do redundancy, redundancy says that when we write a copy of the data to one drive, we're also writing it to another drive. Well, that's not a backup at that point. That's redundancy. You've made a copy of it, so now your machine's got 2 copies of it at all times. But if something happens to your machine, both copies may disappear. Okay? But if something happens to one drive, then it can flip to the other one, keeps right on going until you replace the damaged drive, and it restores it, rebuilds it all back on the redundancy again. All right, other questions? All right, it looks like I got everybody still marked here. I'm going to make sure nobody else came in. I don't see any. Okay, then on that note, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So we ran just under an hour today because we were a few minutes late starting, and here we're stopping at 11 o'clock. So I will see y'all next week at the normal time, and everything should be back normal.